Trade. Let's talk briefly about trade. This is a statement that I think is factual, but some people from yesterday gave me feedback and said it was leaning Democrat, which I don't mean it to be. The stock market likes consistency. They don't want a bunch of unknowns, right? I don't think even the biggest Trump fan in the world would say that he's like a super consistent calming force on the stock market nor, world affairs. So I think that with a Biden presidency, with the House and the Senate as Democrat, you're going to see a settling down of rhetoric and relations with other countries, right? You're not going to see Joe Biden stomp into NATO and say, we might not support you, and give a little wink to Russia. That's just not going to happen, right? And Trump physically did that, right? So you're not going to see that. You're going to see supporting NATO. You're going to see potentially redoing the Iran deal, right? Which again could really raise production of oil and drop the price because they might come back several million barrels of oil extra a day. You're not going to see a huge trade war with China. You're going to see more of a, hopefully they're tough on China, but they do it in a more productive way, not necessarily just kind of like just going insane and having tariffs on everything. That's not the most economically efficient way to do this. So, hopefully tough on China, but a calming force overall. What that is probably going to do, well, and with a Buy American, right? So U.S. procurement should be only Buy American, and we should focus on U.S. jobs. But overall, if he is a calming force, which should probably happen, you would think, at least relatively speaking to Trump, if he is a calming force, what that's going to do is make the world seem like a more reasonable place. And when that happens, the U.S. dollar goes down, right? So people, when it hits the fan, everyone goes and puts their money in the U.S., right? Because it still is the safest place. When stuff is pretty calm and you start to see opportunities elsewhere, money leaves the U.S. like crazy, right? You go find opportunities in other places. You don't buy the U.S. dollar. What that will do is that will drop the value of the dollar. So in the last 4 to 5 years, for sure the last 3 they've gotten killed. The last 4 to 5 they've still underperformed. Emerging market and international has not been additive to our portfolios. Right? The more international you owned, the worse you did in general, because the dollar was strengthening so much because it was hitting the fan all over the place. So people were looking for a safe haven. If that happens, that's actually not bad. The dollar will drop a little bit, right? And that will make international funds look better. And I'll give you an example because I think that's very confusing to a lot of people. So I'll give you an example. If we live in Michigan. So if you were to buy a cottage that's $200,000 on Lake St. Clair in Canada, right? And you start looking at it at the beginning of the summer, and then by fall, you're ready to pull the trigger. But let's say the dollar drops 10%, right? Well, that cottage that was $200,000, if the dollar drops, the cottage is the exact same price, but it takes more US dollars to buy it. So even though that cottage is not worth 1 cent more than it was 4 months ago, instead of paying $200,000, you've got to pay $220,000, right? So if the US dollar drops, other currencies, other assets held in other currencies tend to increase in value. And again, it's not because they necessarily even increased, but it's because it's because the dollar dropped in value. So we think Biden will actually, and even if Trump is reelected, we think the dollar will drop too, just not as much. But when the dollar drops, again, from our portfolio perspective, we'll probably get some additional exposure to international and emerging market. They might actually outperform the U.S. over the next several years as the dollar continues to slide. So that would probably be the main way that we play trade, so to speak.